Jake Mitchell's wire cutters froze mid-squeeze, the metallic snap echoing across the Arizona desert as his eyes locked onto something that shouldn't exist. Chained to the ancient mesquite tree, a massive German shepherd lay dying, each labored breath creating small clouds in the dawn air. The note tied to the rusted chain wasn't a plea for help. It was a confession of failure. Samuel Hartwell's coffee mug shattered against the porch stones when Jake's strangled shout reached the ranch house, the ceramic fragments mixing with spilled coffee like blood on sand. The old man's weathered hands trembled as he reached for his truck keys. This was the third abandonment Jake had witnessed in 2 years, but the military precision of the dog's restraints and the deliberate cruelty of the location told a different story. Someone had wanted this magnificent animal to suffer. "Get the vet on the line now," Jake barked into his radio, though his voice cracked with the weight of what he'd discovered. Who chains a trained military dog to die in the desert? And why did the note feel like a message meant specifically for him? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months before Jake Mitchell found himself kneeling beside a dying German shepherd in the Arizona desert, he had been a different man entirely. Back then, he still believed that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle, that the American dream was just one good season away from coming true. Back then, Sarah's laughter still echoed through the empty rooms of their small farmhouse, and the future stretched ahead of them like an endless highway under the desert sun. The Copper Mesa Ranch had never been much to look at, even in its prime. Sprawling across 800 acres of stubborn Arizona scrubland, it was the kind of place where hope came hard and left easy. When Jake first arrived, running from grief and creditors in equal measure, the ranch was already showing its age. Fences sagged like tired shoulders, the main house needed a new roof, and the barn hadn't seen fresh paint since the Clinton administration. Samuel Hartwell, the ranch's 72-year-old owner, had taken one look at Jake's hollow eyes and offered him work without asking too many questions. "Man's got a right to start over," Samuel had said in his gravelly voice, handing Jake the keys to the small foreman's cabin behind the main house. "Long as he's willing to earn it." What Samuel hadn't mentioned was that the ranch was drowning in debt. The mortgage payments alone were crushing, and the recent drought had turned what little grazing land they had into something resembling the surface of Mars. Jake learned about the $80,000 debt the hard way when the first foreclosure notice arrived tucked between a feed bill and a veterinary invoice. 30 days to come up with the money, or the bank would take everything. Samuel never talked about his past, but Jake had noticed things. The way the old man moved with military precision during their morning routines, the locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway that Samuel never mentioned and Jake never asked about, the fact that Samuel seemed to know an awful lot about military protocols for someone who claimed he'd never served. There were other mysteries, too, like the way Samuel's eyes would grow distant whenever a military helicopter passed overhead, or how he always seemed to know exactly what to say when Jake's nightmares about Sarah's accident got too loud. The old man had a way of showing up with coffee and silence at exactly the right moments, as if he understood the geography of grief better than most. Jake had been checking the southern fence line that morning, the same route he walked every day, when he heard the sound that would change everything. It wasn't much at first, just a wheeze carried on the desert wind, but something about it made his blood run cold, made him think of Sarah's last breath in that hospital room 2 years ago. By the time he reached the mesquite tree, Jake already knew he was looking at another ending. He just hadn't expected it to be the beginning of something else entirely. The German shepherd's amber eyes tracked Jake's movement as he approached, each step deliberate and slow. The dog's massive frame, easily 90 pounds even in its weakened state, lay motionless, except for the shallow rise and fall of his rib cage, thick chains wrapped around his neck and torso like medieval shackles, secured to the mesquite tree with a military-grade padlock that had seen better days. Jake's hands shook as he unfolded the note tied to the chain. The paper was weather-stained, but the handwriting remained clear, written in the precise block letters of someone with military training. "His name is Rex. I failed him. Maybe you won't. He deserves better than what I could give him. I'm sorry. D.L." The dog's ears flicked toward Jake at the sound of his name, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the desperate hope of a dying animal who had been abandoned by the one person he trusted most. Jake pulled out his radio with trembling fingers. "Samuel, I need you to call Dr. Martinez right now. Emergency situation at the south fence line." "What's the nature of the emergency, son?" Samuel's voice crackled through the static. "Military working dog, severe malnutrition, chained to a tree, and Samuel—" Jake paused, looking into Rex's intelligent eyes. "Bring your bolt cutters, the heavy-duty ones." While waiting for help to arrive, Jake knelt beside Rex, careful not to move too quickly. The dog's training was evident even in his weakened state. Despite his obvious pain, Rex held himself with the disciplined posture of a soldier, alert and watchful. His coat, though matted and dirty, showed signs of once being magnificent. Beneath the neglect, Jake could see the powerful build of a dog bred for serious work. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, slowly extending his hand. Rex sniffed cautiously, then allowed Jake to touch his muzzle. The gesture was hesitant but trusting, as if the dog was willing to hope one more time. The chains had cut deep grooves into Rex's neck and chest, where he had struggled against his restraints. Some wounds were infected, angry red lines spreading from the metal links. Jake estimated the dog had been chained here for at least a week, possibly longer. Someone had left him just enough water to keep him alive, but not enough food to maintain his strength. Dr. Patricia Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, her truck kicking up a dust cloud as she navigated the rough terrain. A woman in her mid-40s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had been treating ranch animals in the area for over 15 years. She took one look at Rex and immediately began setting up her mobile examination equipment. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," she said grimly, running experienced hands over Rex's body. These restraints were designed to prevent escape without causing immediate fatal injury. This is methodical, not impulsive. Samuel arrived with the bolt cutters and a makeshift stretcher fashioned from a tarp and fence posts. At 72, the ranch owner moved with surprising agility, his weathered face set in hard lines as he surveyed the scene. When his eyes fell on Rex, something flickered across his features. Recognition, perhaps, or an old pain suddenly awakened. "Military working dog," Samuel observed, studying Rex's bearing and the precise way the chains had been applied. "Shepherd, probably German bloodline. Look at those ears, that stance. This is a trained animal, not a pet." Cutting through the chains took nearly an hour. Rex remained perfectly still throughout the process, following hand signals that Jake didn't remember making. When Dr. Martinez raised her hand in a stay gesture, Rex obeyed instantly. When she pointed down, he lowered his head. The dog's training ran so deep it overrode even his physical distress. As the last chain fell away, Rex struggled to his feet. His legs shook with the effort, but he managed to stand, looking expectantly at Jake as if awaiting orders. The trust in those amber eyes was absolute and heartbreaking. "We need to get him to my clinic immediately," Dr. Martinez said, preparing a mild sedative. "He's severely dehydrated and those wounds need immediate attention. But I have to tell you, Jake, a dog in this condition, there's no guarantee he'll make it through the night." Loading Rex onto the stretcher required careful coordination. Despite his weakness, the dog weighed nearly as much as a full-grown man. As they lifted him into Dr. Martinez's truck, Rex's eyes never left Jake's face. There was something in that gaze that Jake recognized from his own mirror. The look of someone who had been abandoned and was afraid to hope again. Samuel rode in the back with Rex, one gnarled hand resting gently on the dog's head. "Don't you worry, soldier," the old man whispered. "You're among friends now." Rex survived the first night, though Dr. Martinez warned Jake it would be touch and go for at least a week. The German Shepherd lay in the clinic's recovery kennel, connected to an IV drip and wrapped in heated blankets. His breathing had stabilized, but the infection from his chain wounds required aggressive antibiotic treatment. Every few hours, Jake found himself checking his phone for updates, unable to concentrate on the daily ranch work that demanded his attention. On the third day, something remarkable happened. Jake was replacing a broken fence post when his radio crackled to life with Dr. Martinez's voice, excitement barely contained beneath her professional tone. "Jake, you need to get down here. Rex is asking for you." "Asking for me?" "He won't eat, won't respond to commands, won't even lift his head. But when I mentioned your name, his ears perked up and he went to the kennel door." "I think he's bonded with you." Jake found Rex standing at the front of his kennel, alert and watchful despite his obvious weakness. The moment their eyes met, the dog's tail gave a tentative wag. It was the first sign of joy Jake had seen from the animal since finding him chained to that tree. "Hey there, soldier," Jake said softly, opening the kennel door. Rex stepped out carefully, his movements still stiff from his ordeal, and walked directly to Jake's side. Without any prompting, the dog sat and placed one massive paw on Jake's knee. Dr. Martinez watched the interaction with professional fascination. "I've been treating animals for 15 years, and I've never seen a dog form such a strong attachment so quickly. It's almost like he recognizes something in you." Over the following days, Rex's recovery accelerated dramatically. With Jake visiting twice daily, the dog began eating regularly and responding to basic commands. His wounds healed cleanly, and the infection cleared faster than Dr. Martinez had expected. More importantly, Rex began displaying behaviors that revealed the depth of his training. The first incident occurred on Jake's fourth visit. As they walked around the clinic's small exercise yard, Rex suddenly stopped and positioned himself between Jake and the street. A moment later, a motorcycle roared past, backfiring loudly. Rex had sensed the potential threat and moved to protect Jake before the sound even registered. "That's not normal pet behavior," Dr. Martinez observed. "That's tactical training. This dog has been taught to assess and respond to threats in real time." The second incident was even more telling. Samuel had come to visit Rex, bringing along a care package of treats and a new collar. As the old rancher approached the kennel, Rex immediately came to attention, sitting in a perfect military posture and waiting for commands. When Samuel unconsciously used a hand signal to indicate "at ease," Rex relaxed instantly. "Samuel," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "how do you know military dog commands?" The old man's weathered face went carefully neutral. "Picked up a few things over the years. Ranch work teaches you to communicate with animals in all sorts of ways." But Jake noticed how Samuel's hands shook slightly as he petted Rex, and how the dog seemed to recognize something familiar in the old man's bearing. There were layers to this story that nobody was talking about. The breakthrough came on Rex's 7th day at the clinic. Jake was sitting in the exercise yard, reading through a stack of past due bills and trying to figure out how to keep the ranch from foreclosure, when Rex approached with something in his mouth. The dog had somehow retrieved a tennis ball from somewhere in the clinic and was offering it to Jake with an expectant expression. It was such a normal, domestic gesture that Jake almost laughed. Here was this highly trained military animal, capable of detecting threats and following complex commands, wanting to play fetch like any ordinary dog. Jake threw the ball, and Rex bounded after it with surprising energy, returning it with the precise delivery of a dog trained for specialized work. "He's showing you who he really is," Dr. Martinez said, watching from the clinic door. "Underneath all that training, he's still just a dog who wants to belong to someone." That evening, as Jake prepared to leave the clinic, Rex did something that stopped him cold. The dog walked to his kennel door, sat down, and began a low, mournful howling that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. It wasn't the sound of an animal in physical pain. It was the sound of profound loneliness, of an animal who had been abandoned and was terrified it would happen again. Jake knelt beside the kennel and placed his hand against the wire mesh. Rex immediately stopped howling and pressed his nose against Jake's fingers. "I'm not leaving you, boy," Jake whispered. "I just can't take you home yet." Dr. Martinez appeared beside them, her expression thoughtful. "Actually, Jake, I think you can. His physical recovery is remarkable, and honestly, I think he needs the stability of a permanent home more than he needs medical supervision. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what you're taking on? This isn't just a pet. This is a working dog who's been trained for purposes we don't fully understand. He's going to have needs and behaviors that might be challenging." Jake looked into Rex's amber eyes and saw something he recognized from his own reflection after Sarah's death. The desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would choose not to give up. "Then I guess we'll figure it out together." Rex adapted to ranch life with the precision of a soldier reporting for duty. Within his first week at Copper Mesa, he had established a routine that would have impressed any drill sergeant. Every morning at 5:30 sharp, he positioned himself beside Jake's cabin door, waiting patiently for his new handler to emerge. By 6, they were walking the fence lines together, Rex's keen nose detecting problems that Jake's eyes might miss: loose posts, damaged wire, areas where wildlife had attempted to breach the perimeter. The dog's intelligence revealed itself in ways that constantly surprised both Jake and Samuel. Rex learned to operate the manual gate latches within 2 days, could differentiate between the sounds of different vehicles approaching the ranch, and seemed to possess an uncanny ability to sense when either man was feeling unwell or distressed. When Samuel experienced chest pains during their 3rd week together, Rex was at the old rancher's side before the man had even fully registered the discomfort, nudging him toward his medication with insistent whines. "That dog's got better medical training than half the EMTs I know," Dr. Martinez observed during one of her routine checkups. She had started making house calls to monitor Rex's continued recovery, though it was becoming increasingly obvious that her visits had as much to do with enjoying Jake's company as checking on her patient. The first real test of Rex's character came when 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez arrived at the ranch with her grandmother, Margaret Maggie Thompson. Emma hadn't spoken a word since witnessing her parents' violent divorce proceedings 2 years earlier, retreating into a silence so complete that her teachers had begun to worry about autism. Maggie, a retired school nurse with steel-gray hair and gentle hands, had heard about Rex through the church grapevine and hoped that meeting the dog might break through her granddaughter's self-imposed isolation. "I know it's a long shot," Maggie told Jake as they watched Emma stand frozen beside the truck, her small hands clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. "But she used to love animals before everything fell apart. Her therapist thinks that maybe if she could connect with something that doesn't judge or make demands." Rex seemed to understand the delicate nature of the situation immediately. Instead of his usual confident approach, he positioned himself about 10 feet from Emma and simply lay down in the dust, making himself as non-threatening as possible. For nearly an hour, neither the child nor the dog moved. They simply observed each other across that careful distance, 2 wounded souls taking each other's measure. Then, so quietly that the adults almost missed it, Emma began to hum. It was barely audible, a wordless melody that seemed to drift across the space between her and Rex like a bridge being carefully constructed. Rex's ears perked up at the sound, but he remained perfectly still, letting the little girl control the pace of their interaction. By the end of their first visit, Emma had moved close enough to touch Rex's outstretched paw with one finger. When Maggie called her granddaughter back to the truck, Emma turned to Rex and whispered her first words in 2 years. "Goodbye, good dog." Maggie Thompson became a regular fixture at the ranch after that, bringing Emma for visits every weekend, and often staying to help with whatever projects needed an extra pair of hands. At 68, she possessed the kind of practical wisdom that comes from raising 6 children and burying a husband too young. Her presence brought a maternal warmth to the ranch that Jake hadn't realized he was missing. "That child's got something special with your Rex," she told Jake one Saturday afternoon as they watched Emma brushing the dog's coat with meticulous care. "Dogs know things about people that people don't know about themselves. Rex sees something in that little girl that needs healing, and she sees something in him that needs loving." The community's discovery of Rex created ripple effects that neither Jake nor Samuel had anticipated. Word spread through Copper Mesa's tight-knit neighborhoods about the remarkable German shepherd who had been found chained in the desert and was now performing what could only be described as miracles of healing. Dorothy Dot Williams, a 78-year-old Korean War nurse who lived alone in a trailer on the outskirts of town, made the journey to the ranch on a particularly hot Tuesday afternoon. Dot arrived in a battered pickup truck that looked almost as weathered as she did, her silver hair pulled back in a military-precise bun that spoke to her decades of medical service. She carried herself with the ramrod posture of someone who had seen the worst that humanity could offer and had chosen to stand against it anyway. But Jake noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she reached out to pet Rex, and how her eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the present moment. "Heard you got yourself a war dog," she said without preamble, studying Rex with the critical eye of someone who understood the unique psychology of animals trained for conflict. "I worked with the medics in Korea. Saw plenty of dogs that came back different from the ones that went over. Most of them never quite fit into civilian life." Rex approached Dot with unusual caution, as if he sensed the depth of her experience with trauma. When she knelt down to his level, something passed between them that Jake couldn't quite understand. The dog pressed his massive head against her shoulder, and Dot's carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. "He knows," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He knows what it's like to carry weight that ain't yours to carry." From that day forward, Dot became an unofficial member of their growing circle. She would arrive at the ranch unannounced, usually bringing homemade cornbread or a pot of stew, and spend hours sitting with Rex in comfortable silence. Sometimes Jake would find them together in the barn, the old nurse's weathered hands moving through Rex's fur while she told him stories about soldiers she had saved and soldiers she had lost. "Some wounds never heal," she told Jake one evening as they watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. "But they can stop bleeding. That dog of yours, he's teaching me that maybe it's okay to let someone else help carry the load for a while." But even as Rex was bringing healing to others, the ranch itself continued to slide toward financial disaster. The foreclosure notices arrived with mechanical regularity, each one bringing them closer to losing everything. Jake spent sleepless nights staring at spreadsheets that never seemed to balance, trying to find solutions that didn't exist. $80,000 might as well have been $8 million for all the chance he had of raising it. The stress was taking its toll on Samuel as well. The old rancher had always been tough as leather, but Jake noticed him moving more slowly in the mornings, taking more frequent breaks during fence repairs, and occasionally pressing his hand to his chest when he thought no one was looking. Rex noticed too, positioning himself closer to Samuel during their daily rounds and showing signs of distress whenever the old man seemed unwell. The crisis came to a head on a sweltering Thursday morning when Robert Brennan, the bank's loan officer, arrived at the ranch driving a black sedan that looked wildly out of place among the desert scrub and weathered buildings. Brennan was a thin, nervous man in his 40s who clearly wished he was anywhere but here, delivering news that would destroy people's lives. "Mr. Hartwell, Mr. Mitchell," he began, consulting his clipboard with the mechanical precision of someone who had delivered too many foreclosure notices. "I'm afraid the bank's patience has reached its limit. We need full payment of the outstanding debt within 14 days, or we'll have no choice but to begin seizure proceedings." Samuel's face went rigid with anger. At 72, he had survived the Vietnam War, the death of his family, and decades of struggling to keep the ranch afloat. The idea of losing everything to a bank bureaucrat was more than his pride could bear. "This ranch has been in operation for 40 years, Samuel said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We've never missed a payment until the drought hit. Doesn't that count for anything?" Brennan's expression remained carefully neutral. "I understand your frustration, sir, but the bank has shareholders to consider. Perhaps you might consider selling some of your assets to raise the necessary funds. I understand you have a valuable dog that might bring a substantial price from the right buyer." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jake felt Rex press against his leg, the dog's instincts picking up on the sudden tension radiating from both men. Samuel took a step toward Brennan, his weathered hands clenched into fists. "That dog is not for sale," Samuel said, each word precisely enunciated. "Not to you, not to anyone. Some things ain't measured in dollars, son." "I understand the sentimental value, but we're talking about substantial money here. Military working dogs can sell for $50,000 or more to private security firms. Surely you can see the practical—" Samuel never let him finish. The old rancher's hand shot out faster than Jake would have thought possible, grabbing Brennan by the front of his shirt and hauling him close enough to see the fury blazing in his eyes. "Get off my property," Samuel growled, "and don't come back unless you're bringing help instead of threats." Brennan stumbled backward, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "Mr. Hartwell, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The bank has ways of collecting its debts that you might find unpleasant." After Brennan's sedan disappeared down the dusty road, Samuel stood in the middle of the yard, his whole body shaking with rage and something deeper. Rex approached him carefully, pressing his nose against the old man's hand with gentle insistence. 40 years, Samuel whispered, more to himself than to Jake. 40 years of my life in this dirt, and they want to take it away for pieces of paper with numbers on them. That night, Jake found Samuel sitting on the front porch, staring out at the desert with the expression of a man watching his world crumble. Rex lay beside him, the dog's presence offering silent comfort that no words could provide. "Samuel," Jake said carefully, "maybe we should consider their offer about Rex. I know it goes against everything we believe, but if it saves the ranch—" The old man turned to look at him with eyes that held depths of pain Jake had never seen before. "Son, there are some lines you don't cross no matter what's at stake. That dog chose to trust us when he had every reason not to. We don't repay that trust by selling him like a piece of equipment. But if we lose the ranch, what happens to Rex anyway? What happens to Emma and Dot and everyone else who's found something here worth coming back for?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gnarled hand resting on Rex's head. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that had been decades in the making. "There's something I need to tell you, Jake. Something I should have told you a long time ago. About this ranch, about why I took you in, about why Rex means more to me than you know." Rex lifted his head at the change in Samuel's tone, those intelligent amber eyes moving between the two men as if he understood that whatever was about to be revealed would change everything. Before Samuel could begin his revelation, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle cut through the desert silence. Headlights swept across the ranch yard as a pickup truck pulled up to the main house, its engine ticking as it cooled in the night air. Rex immediately went on alert, positioning himself between the porch and the newcomer with the trained precision of a military sentry. A figure emerged from the truck's shadow, moving with the deliberate gait of someone accustomed to being watched. Even in the dim porch light, Jake could see the man was roughly his own age, with close-cropped hair and the kind of posture that screamed military background. He wore civilian clothes, but they hung on his frame like a uniform, pressed and precise despite the late hour. "Evening," the stranger called out, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone unsure of his welcome. "I'm looking for Jake Mitchell. Got word he might have found something that belongs to me." Rex's reaction was immediate and devastating. The dog's entire body went rigid, a low whine escaping his throat as he stared at the approaching figure. His tail, which had been wagging gently moments before, now tucked between his legs, and Jake could feel tremors running through the animal's powerful frame. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, but Rex was beyond comfort. The dog began backing toward the house, his amber eyes never leaving the stranger, torn between the conflicting impulses to run and to protect. The man stopped at the edge of the porch light, and Jake got his first clear look at him. Late 30s, weathered skin that spoke of time spent in harsh climates, and eyes that held the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much. But it was the way he looked at Rex that told Jake everything he needed to know. "Hello, Rex," the man said softly, and the dog's whine became a sound of pure anguish. Samuel rose from his chair with the careful movements of an old man trying to maintain his dignity. "You'd be Derek Lawson, I'm guessing." The stranger's eyes widened slightly at the use of his name. "How did you—" "The note was signed DL," Jake interrupted, his protective instincts flaring as he watched Rex's obvious distress. "But what I want to know is why that dog looks like he's seen a ghost." Derek Lawson's composure cracked slightly, his military bearing giving way to something raw and painful. "Because he probably thinks he has— Last time Rex saw me, I was planning to eat my service pistol for dinner." The words hung in the desert air like a physical presence. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat, while Samuel's weathered face went carefully neutral. Rex pressed himself against Jake's legs, seeking comfort from his new protector while keeping his eyes fixed on the man who had abandoned him. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Derek continued, his voice taking on the mechanical tone of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "Rex was my partner for the last 2. We did explosive detection, crowd control, perimeter security. He saved my life at least a dozen times, and I was supposed to protect him." Derek's hands shook as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. Even from a distance, Jake could see it showed a younger version of the man standing beside a proud, healthy Rex, both of them wearing military gear against a backdrop of desert mountains. "We were doing a routine patrol outside Kandahar when our convoy hit an IED. Killed 3 soldiers, wounded 5 more. Rex took shrapnel in his hindquarters but kept working, kept searching for secondary devices while the medics worked on the wounded. He was bleeding and limping, but he wouldn't quit." Samuel stepped forward, his expression softening with recognition. "That's what they're trained for, to put the mission above everything else, including their own safety." "Exactly," Derek said, his voice breaking slightly. "And that's what I couldn't live with anymore. Every mission, watching him risk everything because he trusted me to keep him safe, knowing that sooner or later my judgment was going to get him killed. After the IED, I started having nightmares. Not about the soldiers who died, not about my own injuries, but about Rex lying in the desert with his guts blown out because I made the wrong call. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand the depth of Derek's trauma. Rex, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, moved closer to his former handler, torn between his loyalty and his fear. The Army offered me therapy, medication, all the standard treatments for PTSD, but nothing helped because the problem wasn't what had happened. The problem was what was going to happen next. Every day I kept Rex as my partner was another day I was risking his life because I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Derek's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. So I put in for early discharge and brought Rex home with me. Figured we'd both adjust to civilian life, maybe find some peace, but the nightmares got worse. I'd wake up screaming thinking Rex was dead and he'd be right there trying to comfort me. This incredible, loyal animal trying to take care of the man who was falling apart. Samuel's expression had grown increasingly grim as Derek's story unfolded. And that's when you decided to chain him to that tree. I'd been planning my suicide for weeks, Derek admitted, the words coming out in a rush as if he needed to expel them before they poisoned him. Had it all worked out? Pills, location, timing? But Rex wouldn't leave me alone. He could sense something was wrong, and he started following me everywhere, sleeping across my bedroom door, refusing to let me out of his sight. Jake felt sick as the full horror of the situation became clear. So you chained him up to keep him from trying to save you? I told myself I was protecting him, Derek said, tears now streaming down his face. That it was better for him to survive without me than to die trying to save someone who wasn't worth saving. I drove him out to that tree, chained him up, and left him enough water for maybe a week. Figured someone would find him before he died, give him a chance at a normal life. Rex had been creeping closer during Derek's confession, drawn by the familiar voice despite his obvious trauma. Now he sat just a few feet away, his amber eyes fixed on his former handler with an expression that Jake could only describe as heartbroken confusion. What I didn't count on, Derek continued, was that leaving Rex behind would be worse than dying. I spent 3 days sitting in my apartment with a loaded gun, but every time I tried to pull the trigger, all I could think about was him chained to that tree, wondering why I'd abandoned him. Samuel moved to stand beside Rex, one gnarled hand resting protectively on the dog's head. So, instead of ending your life, you decided to come looking for him. I checked myself into the VA hospital, Derek said. Spent 6 weeks in their psychiatric program, learning how to live with PTSD instead of being destroyed by it. It's not cured, probably never will be, but I can function now. I can make decisions without second-guessing myself into paralysis. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Jake found himself studying Derek's face, looking for signs of deception or instability, while Rex remained frozen between his old handler and his new protector. Finally, Samuel spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had seen his share of broken soldiers. What exactly are you looking for here, son? Forgiveness? Redemption? Or are you planning to take Rex away from the life he's building here? Derek's answer surprised them all. I honestly don't know. I came here thinking I wanted Rex back, thinking that making amends meant reclaiming what I'd lost. But seeing him now, seeing how he looks at Jake, Derek's voice trailed off as he watched Rex press closer to his new protector. I think what I really want is to know that he's okay, that my failure didn't destroy him the way it almost destroyed me. Jake felt the weight of Rex's trust like a physical presence as the dog leaned against his legs. In the space of a few weeks, this remarkable animal had become central to not just his own healing, but to the healing of their entire community. The thought of losing Rex to his former handler's guilt and need for redemption was almost unbearable. He's more than okay, Jake said firmly. He's saving lives here. Emma Rodriguez spoke her first words in 2 years because of Rex. Dorothy Williams is sleeping through the night for the first time since Korea. This dog has found his purpose, and it's not as anyone's property or redemption project." Derek flinched at the harshness in Jake's tone but didn't argue. Instead, he knelt down and called softly to Rex. "Come here, boy. Let me look at you." Rex hesitated, looking up at Jake as if seeking permission. When Jake nodded slightly, the dog approached Derek with careful steps, allowing his former handler to run experienced hands over his body, checking for injuries or signs of mistreatment. "You've taken good care of him," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion, "better than I ever did. He's gained weight, his coat is healthy, and his eyes—" Derek looked up at Jake with something approaching gratitude. "His eyes aren't afraid anymore." Samuel cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the larger situation. "Derek, I appreciate you coming forward, and I understand your need to make things right. But we've got bigger problems than sorting out Rex's custody. This ranch is 14 days away from foreclosure, and we're about $80,000 short of saving it." Derek's expression shifted, military training taking over as he processed this new information. "What kind of foreclosure? Agricultural loan default? Equity line crisis?" "Combination of both," Jake admitted. "Drought killed our income for 2 years running, and the bank's patience has run out. We've got 2 weeks to come up with the full balance or lose everything." "Including Rex's new home," Derek said quietly, understanding immediately. He was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on Rex's head as he stared out at the dark desert. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the determination of a man who had found his own path to redemption. "I might have a solution to both our problems." Derek's solution arrived 3 days later in the form of a certified letter that made Samuel's hands shake as he read it. The old rancher sat heavily in his kitchen chair, the official document spread across the scarred wooden table like evidence of a crime he couldn't quite comprehend. "Read it again," Jake said, unable to process what Derek had just explained. "Because what you're saying doesn't make any sense." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, Rex lying at his feet in a position that somehow managed to bridge the space between his old handler and his new protector. The dog had been struggling with divided loyalties for 3 days now, torn between the familiar comfort of Derek's presence and his growing bond with Jake and the ranch community. "For the past 6 months, I've been making anonymous payments toward your ranch debt," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "20,000 here, 15,000 there. Enough to keep you afloat, but not enough to solve the problem completely." Samuel's weathered face had gone pale, his hands trembling as he clutched the bank statements that documented transfers he'd never authorized or understood. "You're telling me you've been paying our bills? Without telling us? For months?" "I had to do something," Derek said, his military bearing cracking under the weight of his confession. "After I abandoned Rex, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. The guilt was eating me alive. I hired a private investigator to track him down, and when I found out he'd ended up here, I started researching this place, researching you." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You've been watching us?" "Not watching, monitoring." "There's a difference." Derek's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I needed to know that Rex was safe, that he was being cared for properly. And when I discovered the ranch was in financial trouble, I realized I could help without interfering." "Interfering?" Samuel's voice rose with indignation. "Son, paying off another man's debts without his knowledge isn't helping. It's manipulation." Derek flinched as if he'd been struck. "I know how it looks. I know it's wrong. But I had all this money from my military disability payments, my savings, everything I'd accumulated while planning to kill myself, money I didn't need because I wasn't planning to be alive to spend it." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall and Rex's gentle panting. Outside, the Arizona sun was climbing toward its merciless zenith, promising another day of heat that would test every living thing's will to survive. "How much?" Jake asked finally. "How much have you paid?" Derek consulted the papers in front of him. $47,000 over 6 months. The remaining balance is $33,000. Samuel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "And you expect us to just accept this? To let you buy your way back into Rex's life?" "No," Derek said quickly. "That's not what this is about. I don't want Rex back. I can see he belongs here now with people who can give him the stability he needs. What I want is to finish what I started. I want to pay off the rest of the debt and sign over legal ownership of those payments to you. No strings attached." Jake studied Derek's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch. The catch is that I need you to let me stay." Derek's voice broke slightly. "Not permanently, not as Rex's owner, but long enough to prove to myself that I can be around him without falling apart. I need to know that I can see him happy and healthy and not hate myself for what I did to him." Rex seemed to sense the emotional weight of the conversation. The dog rose from his position on the floor and moved to Derek's side, pressing his massive head against his former handler's knee. Derek's hand automatically moved to scratch behind Rex's ears, and for a moment, the years of separation and trauma seemed to fall away. "I've been living in a motel in Tucson for the past month," Derek continued. "Every day I drive out here and park on the road, watching through binoculars to make sure Rex is okay. I know it's crazy, I know it's stalking, but I couldn't help myself. Seeing him work with that little girl, watching him help that old nurse lady, it's like watching him become who he was always meant to be." Margaret Thompson chose that moment to arrive for Emma's weekly visit, her pickup truck announcing her presence with a cloud of dust and the sound of a badly tuned engine. She climbed out of the cab with the determined movements of a woman who had never let obstacles slow her down, then stopped short when she saw the stranger sitting at their kitchen table. "Well now," she said, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had dealt with family crises for decades. "Looks like we've got ourselves a situation here." Emma emerged from the passenger side of the truck, her small hand clutching the stuffed rabbit that went everywhere with her. Her eyes immediately found Rex, and a smile spread across her face with the uncomplicated joy that only children can manage. But when she saw Derek, her expression grew wary. "Who's that man, Grandma Maggie?" she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Derek stood slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. "I'm Derek. I used to take care of Rex before Jake did." Emma studied him with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Did you hurt him?" "Rex was hurt when Jake found him." The question hit Derek like a physical blow. His face went white, and for a moment Jake thought the man might collapse. Rex seemed to sense his former handler's distress and moved closer, offering silent support. "Yes," Derek said finally, his voice barely audible. "I hurt him very badly. I left him alone when he needed me most." Emma considered this information with the seriousness that children bring to important matters. Then she walked over to Derek and looked up at him with those wide, innocent eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. "But you're sorry now," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Derek whispered. "I'm very sorry." "Rex forgives you," Emma said with the certainty of childhood. Dogs always forgive. That's what makes them better than people sometimes. Margaret Thompson's weathered face softened as she watched her granddaughter's interaction with Derek. "Emma's right, you know. Dogs don't hold grudges the way people do. They live in the present, and right now, Rex can see that you're not the same person who left him in that desert. As if to prove her point, Rex moved to stand between Derek and Emma, his tail wagging slowly as he looked back and forth between them. The dog's body language spoke of acceptance, of a willingness to trust despite past betrayals. Dorothy Williams arrived an hour later, driving her ancient pickup with the same military precision she had once brought to battlefield medicine. She took one look at the assembled group and immediately understood that something significant was happening. "This must be Derek," she said, without preamble, studying him with the clinical eye of someone who had seen every variety of human damage. "Rex told me all about you." Derek looked confused. "Rex told you?" "Dogs talk, son. Not with words, but with their whole bodies. That dog's been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to him, trying to figure out what he did wrong to make you leave him. Seeing you here, alive and trying to make things right. That's going to mean more to him than you realize." Dr. Martinez arrived for her scheduled check of Rex's ongoing health and found herself walking into what had become an impromptu community meeting. After Derek explained the situation once more, she sat back in her chair and studied all the faces around the table. "Derek," she said finally, "what you did was terrible. Abandoning Rex the way you did could have killed him, and it definitely traumatized him. But what you're doing now, trying to make amends while respecting the new life he's built here, that takes a different kind of courage." She turned to Jake and Samuel. "And you two need to decide whether you're going to let past hurts prevent future healing. Derek's offering to save the ranch and asking for nothing in return except the chance to see Rex happy. That's not manipulation, that's penance." As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the group remained gathered around the kitchen table. Rex lay in the center of the room, somehow managing to maintain physical contact with everyone present, as if his presence was the glue holding this fractured family together. The decision they made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of the ranch, but the future of everyone who had found healing in this unlikely sanctuary. The decision might have remained suspended in the desert twilight indefinitely, if not for Samuel's sudden collapse. One moment the old rancher was standing at the kitchen window watching Rex play with Emma in the yard, and the next he was clutching his chest and falling backward into Derek's arms. "Call 911!" Dr. Martinez shouted, immediately dropping to her knees beside Samuel as Derek lowered him gently to the floor. Rex burst through the screen door at the sound of distress, positioning himself beside his fallen friend with the trained urgency of a medical alert dog. The next hour passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and controlled chaos. The paramedics worked with efficient precision while Rex paced the kitchen, whining anxiously and repeatedly nudging Samuel's still form. Even after they loaded the unconscious rancher into the ambulance, Rex refused to leave the spot where he had fallen, as if his vigil could somehow will the old man back to consciousness. "He's stable," Dr. Martinez reported after following the ambulance to Tucson General Hospital. "Massive heart attack, but they got him to surgery in time. The next 24 hours are critical." Jake sat in the hospital waiting room, his head in his hands, while Derek paced the hallway like a caged animal. Rex lay pressed against Jake's legs, offering what comfort he could while dealing with his own obvious distress at Samuel's absence. "This is my fault," Derek said for the 10th time in as many minutes. "If I hadn't shown up, hadn't stirred up all this emotional turmoil, Samuel would be fine." Margaret Thompson, who had driven Emma home and returned to the hospital with Dorothy Williams, fixed Derek with a stern look. "Young man, that's the kind of thinking that got you into trouble in the first place. Taking responsibility for things that ain't your responsibility to take." "Maggie's right," Dorothy added, her nurse's training evident as she assessed Derek's agitated state. "Samuel's been having chest pains for weeks. I've seen the signs. This heart attack was coming whether you were here or not." But the guilt was eating Derek alive. Jake could see it in the way the man's hands shook. in the haunted look that crept back into his eyes, in the way he kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating his chances of running away again. Rex sensed it too. The dog rose from his position beside Jake and walked deliberately to Derek, sitting down directly in front of him and placing one massive paw on his former handler's knee. When Derek tried to turn away, Rex used his nose to gently redirect the man's attention back to him. "He's not going to let you disappear again," Jake observed, understanding the dynamic playing out before them. "He knows you're thinking about running, and he's telling you to stay." Derek's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down his face as he knelt beside Rex, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to stay when everything I touch turns to disaster." Emma Rodriguez, who had been quietly coloring in a corner of the waiting room, walked over and placed her small hand on Derek's shoulder. "Rex stayed with me when I was scared," she said simply. "Maybe you should let him stay with you too." The wisdom of children cut through Derek's self-recrimination more effectively than any adult reasoning could have. He looked up at Emma's solemn face, seeing his own pain reflected in her dark eyes, and realized that running away would hurt not just himself but everyone who had come to care about him in the few days since his arrival. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should stay." Samuel survived the surgery, but the recovery was touch and go. For 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness while Jake, Derek, and their growing circle of friends maintained a constant vigil. Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, dividing his time between the hospital waiting room and the ranch, where he continued his therapy work with the quiet dedication of someone carrying out a sacred mission. On the 4th day, Samuel finally opened his eyes and spoke his first coherent words since the heart attack. "Where's my dog?" Rex was in the room within minutes, having somehow sensed from 3 floors away that his friend was conscious again. The reunion was gentle but profound, with Rex carefully placing his head on the hospital bed while Samuel's weathered hand stroked his fur. "Doc says I'm going to live," Samuel told the assembled group, his voice weak but determined. "But she also says I can't keep pushing myself the way I have been. Ranch work is too much for a man with a damaged heart." Jake felt his stomach drop. If Samuel couldn't work the ranch, there was no way they could maintain operations, even if Derek's money saved them from foreclosure. "That's where Derek comes in," Samuel continued, reading Jake's expression. "Son, I've been thinking about your offer, and I've got a counter-proposal." Derek leaned forward, his attention completely focused on the old rancher. "I don't want your money as charity," Samuel said, "but I'll accept it as an investment. You put up the funds to save the ranch, and in return, you become a full partner in whatever we're building here. Not just Rex's therapy work, but a real program that can help people like yourself, like Dorothy, like that little girl who found her voice again." "A partnership?" Derek's voice was barely audible. "The Copper Mesa Recovery Center," Samuel said, his eyes brightening with renewed purpose. "A place where people and animals can heal each other. Veterans, children, anyone who's carrying weight they shouldn't have to carry alone." Jake felt his heart racing as the possibilities unfolded in his mind. It could work. "We've already got the foundation with Rex, and people are coming here anyway. If we made it official, got proper licensing and insurance—" "I know people in the VA system," Derek added, his military training taking over as he processed the logistics. "Programs like this are exactly what they're looking for, especially for PTSD treatment. The funding opportunities could be substantial." Dr. Martinez, who had been quietly listening from the corner of the room, stepped forward with a smile. "Count me in as staff veterinarian. What Rex has been doing here isn't just remarkable, it's revolutionary. The therapeutic applications of human-animal bonding and trauma recovery are just beginning to be understood." Margaret Thompson nodded approvingly. Emma's transformation has been nothing short of miraculous. If you can provide that kind of healing for other children, other families, you'll have my full support in convincing the community to back this project. But it was Dorothy Williams who provided the final piece of the puzzle. I've got connections with the Korean War Veterans Association and the Army Nurse Corps Alumni Network. There are thousands of women like me who've been carrying battlefield trauma for decades without proper support. They need what Rex offers, what this place could become. Over the following weeks, as Samuel slowly recovered his strength, the vision of the Copper Mesa Recovery Center began to take concrete shape. Derek proved to be as skilled at organization and logistics as he had been at military operations, working tirelessly to research licensing requirements, insurance protocols, and funding opportunities. Jake discovered talents he didn't know he possessed, developing training curricula for therapy animals and creating intake procedures for human participants. His background in ranch management translated surprisingly well to program administration, and his natural empathy made him effective at working with traumatized individuals. Rex, meanwhile, seemed to understand that his informal role as a healing presence was evolving into something more structured and important. He began demonstrating new behaviors, as if his military training was finally finding its proper civilian application. He learned to remain calm during medical procedures, to provide comfort during emotional breakthroughs, and to alert staff when participants were experiencing psychological distress. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Derek continued to struggle with PTSD episodes, though Rex's presence made them more manageable. Jake wrestled with the financial and administrative demands of running a nonprofit organization. Samuel chafed at his reduced physical capacity, though he threw himself into the role of elder statesman and program advisor with characteristic determination. But the most difficult challenge came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after Samuel's heart attack, a black sedan pulled up to the ranch, and Robert Brennan climbed out with the mechanical precision of a man who had never learned to show mercy. "Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Lawson," he said, consulting his clipboard with bureaucratic satisfaction. "I understand there have been some financial arrangements made regarding the outstanding debt on this property." Derek stepped forward, his military bearing evident as he faced down the bank representative. "The debt has been paid in full. You should have received the wire transfer confirmation yesterday." "Indeed we did," Brennan acknowledged. "However, there are some irregularities in the paperwork that require clarification. Specifically, questions about the source of the funds and the legitimacy of the transfer." Jake felt his blood run cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that typically arise when large sums of money change hands without proper documentation of their origin," Brennan said, with the smugness of a man who held all the cards. "The bank has a responsibility to ensure that all transactions comply with federal money laundering statutes." Rex sensed the tension in the air and positioned himself between Brennan and the two men, his hackles raised and his amber eyes fixed on the banker with unmistakable hostility. "Are you accusing us of money laundering?" Derek's voice carried the dangerous calm of a soldier who had been pushed too far. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Brennan replied. "I'm simply informing you that the bank will be conducting a thorough investigation of this transaction, and until that investigation is complete, the foreclosure proceedings will continue as scheduled." The silence that followed was broken only by Rex's low growl, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the earth itself. For a moment, Jake thought Derek might physically attack the banker, and he wouldn't have blamed him if he had. Instead, Derek pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number from memory. "Colonel Harrison, this is Derek Lawson. I need a favor." Colonel Harrison arrived at the ranch 18 hours later, driving a government sedan that looked distinctly out of place among the desert scrub and weathered buildings. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Rex immediately recognized military authority and snapped to attention, his posture shifting to the formal stance Jake had seen only a few times before. "At ease, soldier," the colonel said quietly, and Rex relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained alert and focused. Derek emerged from the ranch house with Jake and Samuel close behind, his own military bearing evident as he approached his former commanding officer. The reunion was formal but warm, two soldiers acknowledging shared history and mutual respect. "Derek," Colonel Harrison said, clasping the younger man's shoulder, "you look better than when I last saw you." "Civilian life appears to be agreeing with you." "It's been a journey, sir," Derek replied. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. When one of my former soldiers calls requesting assistance with what amounts to bureaucratic harassment, I make time," the colonel said, his tone hardening as he looked toward the main house where Robert Brennan waited with visible nervousness. "Shall we resolve this matter?" The confrontation in Samuel's living room was swift and decisive. Colonel Harrison presented Brennan with a folder containing documentation that transformed the banker's bureaucratic confidence into pale-faced anxiety. Military service records, disability payment statements, bank transfer authorizations, and most importantly, a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs confirming Derek's legitimate access to his accumulated benefits. "As you can see, Mr. Brennan," the colonel said with the kind of authority that brooked no argument, "Sergeant Lawson's financial resources are completely documented and legally obtained. Your bank's insinuation of money laundering is not only baseless but potentially libelous." Brennan's hands shook as he reviewed the documents. We were simply following standard procedures for large cash transactions." "Standard procedures that somehow failed to recognize legitimate veteran benefits?" Colonel Harrison's voice carried the dangerous quiet of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I find that curious, given that military disability payments are clearly coded in federal banking systems." Jake watched the exchange with fascination, seeing Derek in an entirely new light. This wasn't just a broken veteran struggling with PTSD. This was a decorated soldier who had earned the respect and protection of his commanding officers through service and sacrifice. "Furthermore," the colonel continued, "I understand this ranch is being developed into a therapeutic facility for veterans dealing with combat trauma. The Department of Veterans Affairs has a keen interest in supporting such initiatives, particularly when they show the kind of promising results I've been briefed about." Samuel leaned forward in his chair, his recovery still evident in his careful movements. "What kind of interest, Colonel?" "The kind that comes with federal funding opportunities, oversight protection, and congressional attention," Colonel Harrison replied. "What you're building here represents exactly the kind of innovative PTSD treatment the VA has been seeking. Rex's therapeutic work with Sergeant Lawson alone justifies significant investment." Rex, who had been lying quietly during the conversation, suddenly raised his head and looked toward the window. A moment later, Jake heard the familiar sound of Margaret Thompson's pickup truck approaching. The dog's ability to detect familiar vehicles from impossible distances never ceased to amaze him. Margaret entered the house with Emma at her side, both of them stopping short when they saw the assembled officials. Emma immediately gravitated toward Rex, who welcomed her with the gentle patience he showed all children. "Colonel Harrison," Derek said, "I'd like you to meet some of the people who make this place special. Margaret Thompson and her granddaughter Emma." The colonel's stern demeanor softened as he knelt to Emma's level. "Hello, young lady. Derek tells me you and Rex are good friends." Emma nodded solemnly. "Rex helped me talk again. I was quiet for a long time because talking hurt. But Rex made it safe." "That's a very important job Rex has," the colonel said seriously. "Taking care of people who are hurting is what soldiers do, and Rex is a very good soldier." "He's not a soldier anymore," Emma corrected with the precision of childhood. Now he's a helper. Colonel Harrison smiled genuinely for the first time since his arrival. You're absolutely right. Sometimes the best soldiers become the best helpers. Dorothy Williams arrived shortly after, having heard through the desert grapevine that official business was being conducted at the ranch. Her presence seemed to complete some invisible circle, transforming what had been a tense legal confrontation into something resembling a family gathering. "Colonel," she said, extending her hand with the confidence of someone who had served in her own capacity, "I'm Dorothy Williams, Korean War nurse. I want you to know what Derek and Jake are building here isn't just therapy. It's salvation." "How so, ma'am?" "I've been carrying battlefield trauma for 70 years, Dorothy said simply. Nightmares, survivor's guilt, the whole catalog of wounds that don't show on x-rays. 3 months working with Rex has done more for my healing than decades of traditional treatment." The colonel's expression grew increasingly thoughtful as Dorothy spoke. When she finished, he turned to Brennan with the kind of look that had probably terrified junior officers for decades. "Mr. Brennan, I think we can consider this matter resolved. The debt has been paid with legitimate funds, the property transfer is complete, and any further harassment of these individuals will be viewed as interference with a federal veteran support initiative." Brennan gathered his papers with shaking hands. "Of course, Colonel. The bank apologizes for any misunderstanding. We'll update our records immediately." After the banker's hasty departure, Colonel Harrison spent another hour touring the ranch and discussing the practical aspects of establishing a formal therapeutic program. His enthusiasm grew as he saw Rex work with Emma and witnessed the obvious bonds between the dog and the various members of their extended community. "Derek," he said as he prepared to leave, "you found something here that the military has been trying to create for decades, a genuine healing environment that addresses trauma at its source rather than just managing symptoms." "It wasn't my idea, sir," Derek replied. "I just stopped running away long enough to see what was already here." The colonel looked out at the desert landscape, where Rex was playing with Emma under Margaret's watchful eye, while Samuel and Dorothy discussed plans for expanded facilities. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when we stop looking for them and start looking at them. Sometimes life hands us second chances when we least expect them, wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Rex's story reminds us that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about finding purpose in our present. Like many of us in our golden years, Jake, Derek, and Samuel had faced loss, betrayal, and the weight of decisions that haunted their sleepless nights. They discovered what we all need to remember: that family isn't always blood, forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and sometimes the very thing we think we're rescuing ends up rescuing us instead. In a world that often makes us feel invisible or forgotten, Rex showed an entire community that every life has value, every wound can heal, and every day offers a chance to choose love over fear. Whether you're caring for a grandchild finding their voice, supporting a veteran struggling with memories, or simply wondering if your own story still has chapters worth writing, remember that healing happens in community. The Copper Mesa Recovery Center stands as proof that broken people can build something beautiful together, that wisdom earned through suffering has power, and that the love we give always finds its way back to us, multiplied. Interaction questions. Have you ever experienced an unexpected second chance that changed your perspective on life? What animal or person helped you through your darkest moments? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The weeks following Colonel Harrison's visit transformed the Copper Mesa Ranch from a struggling livestock operation into something that resembled a small miracle. Federal funding arrived with bureaucratic efficiency, bringing resources that Jake had never dared to dream possible. Construction crews began work on accessible facilities, therapeutic spaces, and expanded housing for both animals and human participants. Rex adapted to his evolving role with the same dedication he had once brought to military service. Professional animal behaviorists arrived to study his techniques, trying to understand how an untrained therapy dog could demonstrate such intuitive understanding of human trauma. What they discovered challenged conventional wisdom about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. "He's not following a program," Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in animal-assisted therapy, explained to Jake after observing Rex work with a group of Vietnam veterans. "He's creating individual treatment plans for each person he encounters. The way he approaches that Marine with combat-related hearing loss is completely different from how he interacts with the Army nurse dealing with survivor's guilt." Jake watched Rex position himself between a wheelchair-bound veteran and the group, creating a sense of protective space that allowed the man to participate without feeling exposed. The dog's ability to read subtle cues and respond appropriately continued to amaze everyone who witnessed it. Derek had moved into one of the newly constructed staff cabins, officially serving as the center's director of veteran services while continuing his own healing journey. His PTSD episodes had become less frequent and less severe, though he remained honest about the ongoing nature of his struggle. "Recovery isn't a destination," he told a group of newly arrived participants during orientation. "It's a daily choice to keep moving forward, even when the past feels heavier than the future." Samuel, despite his doctor's orders to limit physical activity, had become the center's unofficial patriarch. His wisdom and steady presence provided an anchor for both staff and participants who were navigating the choppy waters of trauma recovery. He spent his days in the main lodge, sharing stories, offering counsel, and serving as living proof that survival was possible. Margaret Thompson had been hired as the family services coordinator, bringing Emma with her most days. The little girl had become something of a mascot for the center, her transformation from selective mutism to confident chatterbox, inspiring hope in parents who brought their own struggling children. Dorothy Williams, despite her 78 years, threw herself into her role as head of nursing services with the energy of someone half her age. Her experience treating combat trauma in Korea proved invaluable as the center began accepting more challenging cases. Dr. Martinez had left her private practice to serve as the center's chief medical officer, developing protocols that integrated traditional therapy with animal-assisted interventions. Her romantic relationship with Jake had developed slowly and naturally, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in the community itself. Copper Mesa, which had been slowly dying as younger residents moved away seeking opportunity, experienced an unexpected renaissance. Local businesses thrived as the center brought visitors and staff to the area. Restaurants, hotels, and shops that had been struggling to survive suddenly found themselves busy with customers who came seeking healing and stayed to appreciate the desert's stark beauty. The center's reputation spread through word of mouth and media attention, drawing participants from across the country. Celebrity endorsements and documentary features brought national visibility, but Jake was careful to maintain the intimate, family-like atmosphere that made the program effective. One particularly meaningful moment came when a group of Gold Star mothers, women who had lost children in military service, arrived for a specialized grief counseling program. Rex's response to their profound loss was extraordinary. He seemed to understand that their pain required a different kind of comfort, offering his presence without trying to cheer or distract, simply being a steady companion in their journey through unimaginable sorrow. "He knows the difference between grief that needs space and grief that needs contact," observed Dr. Chen, watching Rex lie quietly beside a mother who was sobbing for her lost son. Most humans can't make that distinction, but somehow he understands intuitively. The center's success created new challenges. Waiting lists grew longer, funding requirements became more complex, and the pressure to expand sometimes conflicted with the intimate scale that made the program work. Jake found himself walking a delicate balance between growth and maintaining the essential character of what they had built. Rex, now officially recognized as the center's lead therapy animal, seemed to understand his elevated status. He had developed a training program for other dogs, teaching them through demonstration and patience the subtle arts of emotional support. Not every animal could match his intuitive abilities, but several showed remarkable promise under his guidance. As autumn painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jake often found himself standing on the porch where he and Samuel had first discussed Derek's proposal. The view was the same: endless sky, stubborn scrub brush, mountains that had watched over this land for millennia. But everything else had changed in ways that still amazed him. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the playground where Emma was teaching younger participants how to properly approach Rex. Veterans sat in discussion circles under ramadas that provided shade from the desert sun. Families walked the trails that connected various therapy areas, finding their own paths to healing. In the center of it all, Rex moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his true calling, offering hope to everyone fortunate enough to cross his path.